You have heard of Sleepy Hollow's Headless Horseman, but what about the Headless Rider who haunts the foggy lanes of Ireland to this very day? Grab your shamrock and join me on a ride from this creature's Celtic roots all the way to some of his most modern hauntings.
Immortal sunshine.
Hello and welcome to the podcast Shedding Candlelight on Cryptids, Hauntings, Mythology, and more. If it is weird, we are talking about it. This is your host, Donna, and today we are diving into one of Ireland's most chilling legends. This headless harbinger of death has been galloping through the darkest recesses of folklore for centuries, and its name comes from Irish Gaelic roots, pronounced originally as something like Dullahan, which is a word describing a dark, sullen person. As the story was shared and languages changed, the creature became more commonly known as the Dullahan or the Dullahan, with variations of the name differing further by regional dialects and by placing emphasis on either the first or the second syllables according to those regions. I will probably pronounce the harbinger's name in a bunch of different wrong ways today, and as always, you are welcome. The Dullahan is a bit of a grim reaper. Sometimes he travels the land on the back of a horse, cracking a whip made from a human spine. At other times, he drives a black coach pulled by a team of headless horses. The wheel spokes of the coach are thigh bones, and the coach's lanterns are human skulls. And tucked under the coachman's arm is its own head. Should you encounter this creature and hear his severed lips call your name, well, that's it. Your time is up. Legend says your soul has been claimed and that death will swiftly follow. This headless horseman story begins in the pre Christian era of Ireland around the time when Celtic gods reigned supreme. Scholars believe the Dullahan might be linked to Crom Dubh, an ancient Celtic deity associated with fertility, harvest, and human sacrifice. This deity, whose name means Black Crooked One, was worshipped by early high kings of Ireland like Tyrnmas, the Great Lord, around 1500 BC. Legends from that time talk about rituals where heads were offered to Cromdub to ensure bountiful crops. As Christianity swept through Ireland in the 5th and 6th centuries, the old gods, like the Black Crooked One, morphed into figures of folklore, vanishing from being real, worshipped gods to then only showing up in the shadows as demons and fairies of ill repute. This is why some believe the Dullahan is the Black Crooked One reborn as a vengeful spirit who now demands your soul. Since the heads have stopped being sacrificed in his honor, he now has to take your soul. People also claim the Dullahan is an unseelie fae coming from the wicked side of the fairy realm and tied to other death omens like the banshee, whose well foretells doom. Obviously, most of the lore is just that, stories and suppositions. But in 1802 AD, so centuries after the ancient Celts and their gods were walking the earth, a British military engineer named Charles Vallancey wrote a book. Charles was an antiquarian, which is someone who studies, collects, and often has a deep knowledge of old traditions and artifacts, including old books. Charles also had a particular passion for Irish linguistics. In Charles's book titled Prospectus of a Dictionary of the Language of the Ercoti or Ancient Irish, Charles wrote about the Dullahan, describing it as a terrible bugbear that the peasants feared. He said this bugbear would drag its chains through the villages at night. Bugbear is a term that was used the way we might use the descriptor of boogeyman today. In his book, Charles goes on to compare the Dullahan to an Arabian demon called the Wullahan because he thought there was some linguistic link between the two. He called this demon the Satan of the Arabs and said it was a terrifying nocturnal spirit who drags heavy chains through the villages at night, seemingly for the sole purpose of scaring the villagers. However, this Arabian demon never really existed outside of Charles's own writing. It seems he was a bit obsessed with linking Irish words and mythology to other ancient civilizations and languages. Modern scholars have mostly agreed that Charles made some pretty considerable leaps, maybe even jumping right over the line of reality and into Charles's own fantasy. I did try to look up Charles's Arabian Satan, and I have to say that I happen to agree with the modern scholars on this one. But maybe Charles had some sort of artifact or tap into ancient knowledge that the rest of us just have not found yet. So never say never, it could all be true. But Charles's version of both the Dullahan and the Wullahan portrayed them as generic night haunting, chain dragging boogeymen out to scare people. He shows them as noisy, not headless. However, his book was focused on etymology, not folklore. So he doesn't deep dive into the when, what, and why of it all. A couple of decades later, in 1825, another antiquarian published a book. This man's name was Thomas Crofton Croker, and he was a bit like the Brothers Grimm, traveling the countryside, gathering stories from the villagers, and writing them all down for what was considered to be a groundbreaking collection of folklore. His book was titled Fairy Legends and Traditions of the South of Ireland. This book was expanded in 1828 and in 1834, and it contains a whole section dedicated to the Dullahan. This section records several eerie tales and even a ballad that established the Dullahan as a headless harbinger of death, who often rides a large horse or drives a silent coach pulled by headless horses. The coachman carries a grinning, severed head whose eyes are balls of fire, and he holds the head up high into the air like a lantern, all while cracking his whip, the one fashioned from human spine. Thomas's stories are all based on the original tales that he heard during his travels. In The Good Woman, a hard-working but occasionally hard-drinking man named Larry Dodd rides home one night and overtakes a cloaked, silent woman hurrying along the road. Curious and chivalrous, Larry offers the woman a ride on his horse. She accepts, remaining quiet as they travel along the lane until they near a churchyard. The woman then leaps off the horse and races toward the graveyard. Larry follows this woman who is now revealed to be headless, and she's not the only one. In the old churchyard, Larry witnesses a whole party of headless specters, including gentlemen, ladies, soldiers, and even priests. They're all dancing in a circle around a fiery wheel adorned with skulls. Among the eerie party that night, there were skeleton bowls containing severed heads displayed like baskets of balls. The headless ones greeted Larry enthusiastically. Welcome, Larry Dodd, welcome. Another partygoer, while holding his own grinning head under his arm, offered Larry a cup brimming with a mysterious beverage. Larry was intrigued and he was also a drunk, so he threw back what the headless people were having and said it was capital stuff. I mean, ghouls do know how to party. And the best part, as soon as Larry drank the drink, his head popped off. He then spent the night partying with the rest of the headless people, drinking and dancing, only to wake up at dawn with his head reattached to his shoulders. His body was a little bruised and his horse was missing, though. So naturally, Larry then goes home to his worried wife and tells her, yeah, honey, I was out all night. And yes, it was because I picked up a woman when I left the bar. But the woman was not mortal. And you have no idea how tempting this supernatural woman and her friends were. I was powerless to resist their fairy magic. And honey, after those vixens gave me something really tasty to drink, they stole my horse. But you are so lucky, wife, because your man is still alive. Those fiends only temporarily decapitated me, and now I get to live to warn everyone else against partying with the headless ones. Because if anyone else is to do such a thing, they risk losing their heads forever. So, Larry is a hero. I'm sure his wife was very happy and glad that her husband put the needs of their family above his own vices. Another story in the book is Hanlon's Mill. In this one, a man named Mick was on his way home from the Ballyduff, where he had been visiting the shoemaker. At dusk, Mick was nearing the ruins of Hanlon's Mill when he heard a strange, ghostly cry mingled with the clatter of the mill machinery. The noise spooked Mick, but he didn't bother to investigate. He keeps traveling, and soon afterward, he spots a black coach traveling down the lane. It's silent and is pulled by headless horses. Horses being driven by a headless coachman. The death coach races past Mick and vanishes into the night. Shortly afterward, news arrives in town that a local landowner, a neighbor of where the old mill was, has suffered a sudden and fatal fit. Villagers then believed the coachman Mick saw was a supernatural harbinger come to collect the landowner's soul. Thomas's section on the Dullahan also includes a ballad called The Death Coach. This song describes a silent, spectral midnight coach rumbling through the dark Irish countryside, drawn by 6 headless horses and driven by a headless Dullahan, holding a skull lantern. The coach's wheels are made of thigh bones, its axle a human spine, and the upholstery is made of human skin. The coach moves without sound, stopping only to collect the souls of the doomed. As it passes landmarks like Rathcooney Churchyard and Blackrock, bells toll ominously. The coach halts at Ballin Temple Churchyard for the night, where the Dullahan and other headless figures jest about their condition before departing at dawn toward the old head of Kinsale, emphasizing the inevitable, unstoppable march of death across the land. So, firstly, maybe I was harsh in my sarcasm against Larry, and there really are a bunch of headless spirit types of beings making you drink and lose your head right along with your horse. Secondly, this ballad reminded me of the old Celtic beliefs talking about the veil being thin around our modern Halloween time and how there is a death march and spirits being able to speak to the living. I touched on this a bit in one of my other episodes. All of these things tie in not only to Celtic beliefs, but long held beliefs in every culture that spirits live on in some form or fashion and are able to return to and be seen in the land of the living. Thomas's book includes our favorite and best known Dullahan story, the Headless Horseman. This story says that on a stormy, moonless night near Westmeath, a bold traveler named Charlie encounters a gigantic headless horseman riding a massive, headless, white horse. The horse was a full 18 and a half hands tall, had short cropped ears, and large eyes. To put these sizes into perspective, lest any of us think this horse and rider are mythologically oversized, 18 and a half hands is just over 6 feet tall. The Clydesdale horses that many of us are familiar with are this size and taller. However, at the time when this book was published and in the decades before it, and specifically in Ireland where Thomas heard this story, most horses were only 15 to 16 hands, with few of them reaching 17 hands. So the story's depiction, according to what people would have been familiar with in that time and place, does reflect that this rider and horse were indeed monstrously large. And on this dark and stormy night, they were traipsing through the countryside, the headless horseman carrying his grinning lantern like head under one arm, its eyes blazing as he cracked his whip of human spine. Charlie does not step aside when the headless rider approaches. Instead, Charlie confronts the Dullahan, eliciting a growl from the creature. But Charlie is undeterred, telling the headless rider that his coat is mighty nice, except it's a little long in the waist, and that white horse, well, it's a brave one. The Dullahan makes a retort, his voice hollow, going on to tell Charlie that it had been 100 years since he and his horse had broke their necks at the bottom of Kilcomer Hill. The Dullahan then goes on to challenge Charlie, the two of them entering a perilous race, the pursuit full of banter between the two, with Charlie ultimately being the victor. This feat of bravery earns Charlie the Dullahan's respect, and the creature promises Charlie his protection, saying, "The headless horseman will never desert you, nor the old mare." Then the headless horseman conceals his head in his pocket and vanishes at dawn. Charlie then goes home and has a bit of luck, and he attributes all of that luck to the supernatural night when he took on the devil and won. In other early variations of the story, there is always a trial or contest of some sort, pitting the brave Charlie against the Dullahan. Charlie always wins and then goes on to win bets or save his family from some sort of peril, with Charlie contributing his success to having beat death at its own game. Thomas and his stories give other descriptions of the Dullahan, like saying its head is the color and consistency of moldy cheese, with a mouth stretched ear to ear and eyes that dart like flies. Furthermore, the stories are all tied to real places, and Thomas makes note of the Dullahan sightings taking place in Limerick, Kerry, and beyond. In one of the stories, Thomas writes about a traveler being pursued by the Dullahan on a dark road. The Dullahan catches up to the man who believes he would have met his doom had it not been for the gold-headed pin that fell from his shirt and onto the road behind him. The Dullahan runs away, shrieking and vanishing as if the gold repelled him. In other stories collected from Southern Ireland, this theme of the Dullahan being repelled by gold persisted, possibly because of old ideas that gold was purifying, or because of the sun worshipping ideology of gold being the light bearing element that could be used against the forces of darkness, a good versus evil scenario. Thomas's book, though, was a big hit. It even caught the eye of the brothers Grimm, who translated Thomas's book into German. This move spread the Dullahan story beyond the shores of Ireland and solidified him as a headless literary legend. In 1888, William Butler Yeats, the famous poet, included the Dullahan in fairy and folk tales of the Irish peasantry. Yeats called the Dullahan a solitary fairy, often riding with the banshee or driving that black coach. He emphasizes the silent coach as a death omen, heard but not always seen. Yeats, or Yates as you might prefer to call him, edited and republished Thomas's work in 1892, renaming the book Irish Fairy Tales. He adds poetic flair, linking the Dullahan to Ireland's misty, melancholic landscape. Around the same time in 1893, John O'Hanlon's The Poetical Works of Langanisus draws from Thomas's work, describing the Dullahan in verse as a coach driver in tales like Legend of Murrisk. By the early 20th century, the legend solidifies even more with Robert Lynn's 1909 Home Life in Ireland, which was republished in 1912. This book mentions the soundless coach in Connemara, with witnesses claiming to see silent shadows. James J. Doyle's 1992 article in the Irish Monthly called The Irish Popular Traditions recounts how the coach splashes blood on doorsteps as a mark of doom. Throughout this period, with all the retellings and rewritings, the Dullahan's traits stabilize as him being headless, dressed in all black, carrying a spine whip, and being repelled by gold. But there are still many variations. Sometimes the horse is headless, while others it is not, and sometimes it's black, while others it is white. Sometimes the headless horseman blinds people by hitting them with his whip. And in places like Doneraile or Ballyconneely, folks swear they hear hooves and see glowing eyes. The Dullahan's most famous retelling is Washington Irving's 1820 The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Irving's headless horseman was a Hessian soldier decapitated in the American Revolution who chases Ichabod Crane through misty woods, pumpkin in hand. Now, if you are keeping track of the dates, you will notice that Irving published his book 5 years before Thomas's collection of Irish folklore was first published. Irving did live in Europe and he knew German folklore, which is full of its own headless riders. It's claimed that Irving did likely hear folkloric tales from Irish immigrants. However, it is debatable which stories actually influenced the writing of one of our most beloved Halloween tales. I am mentioning Irving's work in this Dullahan episode because of the similarities. As most of us know, gods and monsters of the past and of folklore are often the same beings called by different names in different regions, or at the very least, they are all similar enough to make you wonder if there is any reality behind the old legends, if it is not simply people traveling to and fro telling the same stories. Ghost stories predating Irving and Thomas from all over England in the 1700s feature headless coachmen, like Joseph Addison's 1711 tale in The Spectator. Scottish legends have similar headless riders, and we have already mentioned the plethora of German and Irish tales. So, this month, in honor of St. Patrick's Day, we are letting the Dullahan represent the broader archetype of the decapitated phantom, who is a messenger of death rooted in Celtic sacrifice, but galloping globally throughout folklore and fiction alike. The headless one is no longer a bugbear. He is a symbol of the inevitable, lurking in the spaces of our worst and best imaginations. Thank you guys for joining me today. If you have your own spooky stories to share, you can drop me a line at leedawnabooks@gmail.com. All of my books, fantasies and thrillers alike, can be found at leedawnabooks.com, or use your shop app for those extra points. Just go to Lead on a Books. Eclipse of the Norns, Book 3 of the Eyes of Midgard series, is out now, and it is available in ebook and paperback. Please like, subscribe, follow me on social media if that is your thing. Most importantly, if you are going to be out late, keep a piece of gold in your pocket. You never know who is going to be out riding in the night. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone. I will see you next time. Bye.
Headless.